All right. We got one person in the house. Hello, Miss Neal.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, I am fine for a hump day. How about yourself?
No complaint. I got a question.
Okay. I may or may not have an answer.
With the turn it in for the OMA, I've been trying to turn in that assignment and it is not working. I was wondering if you all were having problems or
Not that I have been told. You have Seth's email,
no, don't Seth, no.
Seth Opry, or Opry. It's like Opry.
Okay.
He's the tech guru, and I would just shoot him an email.
Okay.
Let me see if I can shoot over without logging myself out, because that's exactly what's going to happen, because I know my kind of luck.
I'll
Oh,
just
no,
I'll
wait
find it.
a minute. Okay, so let's go Seth. Search. Okay, that was unimpressive. Oh, here we go. All right. His email. Come on, load up. Come on, here we go. Okay. Okay, his email is SOPREA.
SOPREA.
Yep, at gardner-web.edu.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem. Give him a shot and see if he can't help you out.
Okay.
All right. And Miss Toinette, how are you? Oh, man, she gagged me and muted me. And unsighted me. Okay. All right. We'll give.
I'm fine. How are you? I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm used to being ignored. It's all good.
No.
Smith. Hello, Miss Smith. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. How is everybody's summer proceeding or not?
Not. No summer yet.
Because you're working on grad school stuff, or because you're just, still working on school stuff?
Grad school. I'm working summer school. So that's a challenge.
Yep. I remember it. Well, I would have more sympathy, but like I said, I completed a dissertation while working full-time as a principal. So
Right.
My sympathy level is, I got love for you, don't get me wrong. I got number love for you, but I understand. All right. What else are we waiting on? So are you all part of the same group, or are you all part of 3 different groups?
It does. Take the tip off. You just unscrew it.
3 different groups.
Yeah,
3 different groups. Okay. All right, Emily, who's in your group?
Cassandra, Facetia, and Kim.
Okay. And Tiffany?
Jordan, Claudia, Sheldon, and Sherrod.
Okay. And Antoinette?
Tanya, Tracy, and Sheldon.
Okay.
Take
All
the
right.
tip off. Okay.
Okay. Here's Facetia. No, it was an email. Okay. All right. I will tell you what. I mean, we typically have a 7 o'clock start time. So how about I give our missing folks another, say, 5 minutes to trickle in, and then you know what? We're gonna roll and make it do what it do.
Okay.
Does everybody here have a copy of the presentation or their presentation, or are you waiting on somebody else that actually has it?
I've got ours.
Emily, I'm shocked. And Tiffany, what you?
I have it.
But yeah, but
I don't know how to put it on the screen.
okay. So what you do is you go ahead and if on the bottom of your screen you should have a tab when it's your turn that says share, be green.
Okay, I got you. Okay. Back on.
And then once you hit share, it will project. You'll be the one that's actually presenting.
Okay.
All right. And then when you're done, I think either I share or I take it back from you.
Okay, got you.
So let me pause the recording for one. Zoom the recording. I just got an email from Facicia wanting to know the link. So hopefully she will unmute. Hopefully she'll be on here in just a moment. So let's talk about case study number 2. Toinette, Emily, you there?
Yes.
Okay. There's Tanya. Get her in the house. All right. Hello, Miss Smith. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Outstanding. Happy Wednesday. Welcome. We're just getting ready to get started. I think other folks will trickle in here shortly. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to talk about school funding. So if any of you don't know or don't remember, Leandro was a pretty interesting case. To keep it simple, this case that was based around Leandro. Basically, the 5 poorest school districts in the state sued, arguing that it's the state's responsibility to provide adequate funding for all students. And the counties, I think it was Hoke, and I forget, it was the 5 poorest counties, and they argue that we don't have the tax base of a Wake or a Charlotte or a Guilford to be able to provide education for our kids the way those counties do. Well, then the 5 rich counties, so Guilford, Charlotte, Wake, Winston, and I want to say Cumberland, also joined the suit. But their argument was, well, yes, we have a bigger tax base, but we also have more students to provide for, and we also have more issues with our students to provide for as well. So they also joined the suit. So it was initially the 5 poorest counties in the state, and then it was the 5 rich counties in the state that joined on to the suit. So that's kind of the backdrop of how Leandro started. I think at the time I was still an assistant principal in Charlotte when the case was initially brought and was ruled on. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop and hear about your case studies. I think we'll have more people coming in here shortly. The case is back in me, yes, and we'll get to, I think, why that is here shortly, Tanya. But I think that's a good point that you bring up because it's back in the news, and I think when you look at funding and charter funding and what the legislature has been trying to do over the past few years, I think there's a reason for that. So, Tanya, whose group are you with? They told me, but I forget.
Tonette and I and Tracy and Sheldon, but Tonette and I are the ones that are on for tonight.
Okay.
So I'll be the main presenter, and Tonette will just chime in if there are artifacts that I left off that she wants to bring forward to the group.
Okay, so Tanya, why don't you go ahead and load up? We will start with you two, since you are the dynamic duo, and go ahead and hit share your screen, and I will go ahead and let you begin this presentation. Your presentation.
Okay. I'm not seeing where I share the screen. Okay.
Go to the bottom of your computer screen. There should be a green box that says share.
Got it.
See it?
Yeah.
Ah, look at you.
Did I? You see it?
I see it.
Okay. All right. Well, this evening, we're just going to share our perspective as it relates to the case study feedback that we came up with as a team. So number one, just talking to just presenting, this is student-based budgeting. What we found out over the years that this particular category of funding has morphed. Back in 1989, it was classified as the voucher program. Also, too, is classified as the weighted student funding program. So it's taken different avenues in reference to looking at a solution that typically is best in reference to funding students and students' educational needs. One of the things too that we found is that students from low socioeconomic and disadvantaged status tends to require more money to educate them within the public school system. I know that that was a shocker for me, because initially in research, we thought that the good programs, good teaching is just kind of a catch-all net, but not to the extent that we need to reach out to and extend more funding resources for our students of low socioeconomic status. So when we talked about in addressing the appropriateness of the student-based budget and plan, I'm just going to kind of talk about them. But again, we talked about it being fair distribution in relationship to low-income communities. We thought it was a good thing to look at ways of modifying the funding programs for our county and via for our state. There is evidence-based effectiveness as it relates to student-based budgeting. I know in particular Atlanta and 10 other states in particular use this particular funding source formula method. It looks like it establishes more equity among schools as it relates to ensuring students' needs are being met. And it solves in infrastructure expenses, so challenges as it relates to funding needs that the school has that schools typically can't find funding for. And it seems to level the playing field more as it relates to teacher recruitment. So teachers would feel as though there's equal pay no matter what county they're in serving students in particular. Another thing too, we just looked at what the power and duties are in relationship to the school principal and how it ties into funding, and the funding made available as it relates to budgeting and plans as it relates to the school is tied into the school improvement plan. So again, having more money to serve students with particular diverse needs gives leverage for the school and for the principal in the allocation of appropriate resources. Again, we talked about the legal and ethical concerns. We as a team collectively looked at a lot of the positive aspects as it relates to money, as it relates to educational equity, the concerns in regards to there being more of a connectivity amongst low income and affluent income communities where we're closing that disparity gap. And also too, again, we're looking at relationships within our state. It helps to it actually helps to make sure that counties don't feel left out because of their lack of economic revenue there. And again, always looking at ways for which we can improve based on the school improvement plan. This particular student-based funding looks like it comes from a more nurturing encouragement and student achievement based perspective, rather than it just being about school districts that have more money and students and parents and communities that can afford more. In regards to looking at critique, we talked about the power, critical theory, etc. And also to the profession, there was a lot of positive aspects. Pretty much we hit on all points as it relates to the profession and bringing more dignity and quality to what we do as teachers and educators in the public sector. Also too, and bringing it back to the Leandro case, we just know that there's a need for reconsideration of how funding of public schools is actually set up at this point in time. And again, over 25 years, it has morphed. And we are now, it looks like our state is now coming to the place of recognizing that what we did was not always in the best interest of all of our students, especially those of low socioeconomic status, in particular, especially those in low economically served communities. So those were pretty much the main issues that we touched on as it relates to student-based funding, tied it into the Leandro case. There were some inappropriate elements in regards to, we're saying the superintendent, well, was it approved by the state? We know that such a plan has to come down from state legislator. They have to approve it, and it has to funnel down into the district. So we didn't really see where that was particularly addressed in the case study. Again, we talked about it emulating the voucher program, and the voucher program started in Wisconsin. So, just making sure that the details of some of the challenges that came before with other states trying this new program, that the glitches have actually been ironed out. It sets the tone for schools to be more competitive. In competition, we're looking at actually paying more or less, I'm losing my words here, more or less awarding schools whose performance is better than schools whose performance is subpar. And also, too, we look at the mere fact that teachers that feel as though they're not getting the support that they need may leave low-performing schools to actually go to higher-performing schools. And again, we're looking at the loyalty and trust elements of loss in teacher positions, and maybe even students having the leverage to transfer to schools that are meeting performance expectations. So those are some of the challenges or the inappropriateness that we saw as it relates to the student budget and plan. And again, we just had some questions in regards to funding, the long-term adverse effect. What would it look like 10, 20 years down the road? And is this particular student-based funding plan the best possible solution in serving students within our state?
Okay. And so if you had to make a call based on what you know about Leandro and based on what you've read about the superintendent in this case study, would you say his budget or his plan for spending, would you call it legal or illegal?
Well, at this juncture, based off of the content that's in the case study, I would classify it as being illegal. But if it was approved by legislation, then I would say that it's legal.
Right. Well, no, your first instinct is correct. His actions were clearly in violation of several aspects of Leandro. And your presentation, you bring up several good points that we can circle back to, particularly around long-term funding issues by the legislature. But I think your holding and your instinct to think that he's not acting correctly is right. Now, superintendents have boards and things of that nature, so this may be something that he, in this case, would survive, but know that as a principal, when you are dealing with school level budgets, it is not. You cannot submit a budget that is contrary to board policy or state spending. Now, fortunately, they won't let it get that far. With principals, that they'll kick it back to you and say, you've screwed up, fix it, or we'll fix it for you. But again, so we're looking at two different levels of spending. But in this case, yeah, you cannot submit a budget or a proposal that is contrary to the law. And that's something that you need to kind of ingrain in your head very quickly, because again, taking it down to the principal level, teachers sometimes want to take shortcuts even with simple things like receipt books. And they'll nail you for that before they'll nail the teacher. So, okay, good. Tiffany, do you have anything you want? I'm sorry, was it Toinette? Anything you wanted to add to your partner's presentation?
No, sir. I think she did a very good job.
I think she did okay. Outstanding. Okay. Facetious, you there? Whose partner are you? In whose group are you? Okay, getting dissed. All right. So Emily, let's go top of the screen and go to you.
Okay.
You go and pull yours up. Outstanding, Tonya. Nice job.
Thank you.
Okay, can you see it?
I see it now. Oh, no, we got loading. There you go. Okay.
Okay. So our agenda, we talked about Leandro versus state. What was held, the review of the superintendent's plan, was it appropriate or not, and then the role of the principal. So with Leandro, schools with lower than average tax revenues were at a disadvantage. The state did not equalize funding across North Carolina. It costs more to properly educate disadvantaged children. Could not compete with teacher pay, special services materials. This is just going through the background of the case. And forgive me for reading straight from the slide, but this is not one that I created.
I'm able to, I can read this one, Emily.
Oh, good. There you are.
All right, for the background information, the Leandro case started when the 5 rural school districts sued the state, arguing that they couldn't raise enough tax revenue to provide a quality education while their wealthier neighbors could. They could not compete with the wealthier school districts in terms of the teacher pay, special services, or educational materials. In 1997, the Supreme Court held that every child has a right to a sound basic education under the state constitution. In 2004, the court ruled again that the state had not lived up to the Leandro standards set by the previous ruling. Of equal significance, the Supreme Court ruled that the state of North Carolina, not local school districts, has the ultimate constitutional obligation to actively safeguard and successfully deliver every child's Leandro rights, no exceptions and no excuses. And a number of urban school districts were allowed to intervene in the Leandro lawsuit. They raised a second and equally important issue. They claimed that their schools were burdened with large numbers of disadvantage and more costly to educate students. Therefore, they argued that the state constitution requires North Carolina to provide schools anywhere in the state with adequate resources to fully educate disadvantage. And when they mention disadvantage, they're referring to the poor, special education, and the limited English proficient students in regards to the background of the case.
Thank you, Facicia.
No problem.
So this slide focuses on the findings of the Leandro case. And the number one thing that we focused on was all students have a right to a sound basic education. The state, not local districts, have the responsibility to provide that. A sound basic education is defined as giving students all the opportunities necessary to become an adult possessing the following. And you guys can read that. I don't have to read it word for word for you, but this is what was held. So this is the bottom line once everything kind of came out. So then the question is, was the superintendent right or wrong? And we tried to argue both sides because that was the assignment, but we really felt like he was wrong. We said that the responsibility of providing funds for a sound basic education lies with the state, not with the state of North Carolina, not the district. Also, in the letter, he was very vague, and we said he must be transparent about the details of budget spending. He doesn't really define in the things that he says how he's going to decide how those funds are, spent. He just says at-risk kids or at-risk students, and it's not very clear. And then we said doing pilot schools creates the possibility of schools with advantages over others, because it said that he had done like 4 schools initially that way and the others didn't do that. So we thought that was wrong too. And then we tried to come up with some things that was right, but basically there wasn't that much that was right. His heart was in the right place, but I don't think that protects you, in the long run. We said he was making efforts to equalize opportunities eventually for all the students in his district, and certain funds could be used to provide extra staff and resources such as Title I funding, but that's federal funding. So again, that's not really district. Ethical standards to consider require that the principal make the budget available to the public. Terms such as predetermined weight should be clearly defined to the stakeholders. Principal must follow what state and federal say over what his superintendent says. So the letter came from the superintendent, but then, we talked about how, if a principal is told from a superintendent to do certain things, he's got to always look at what the state says and what the federal says, because those override district. Community involvement must be consistent and transparent. And I think that was it.
Okay.
Have any of you had the pleasure of sitting in on school level budget meetings or Title I budget meetings?
No.
If you get the opportunity, you should. For all that Title I gives you with regard to funding, I can tell you now, almost 20 years of dealing with Title I funding, it is an absolute nightmare to have to manage, because it's that level of funding that you have to dot your I's, cross your T's, and then go back and do it again. I've had requisitions I've had to rewrite 5 times just to thread what I call the Title I needle. So it's definitely something that if you get the opportunity, you should take advantage of. Has anybody found it interesting that the state actually ruled that students in the state have a right to a, quote, sound basic education?
Yeah, I agree.
I only
our
asked that
group
because
kind of was, we were discussing that term sound, that it wasn't really clearly defined. What is a sound education? What does that consist of?
Well, if you look at this slide here, they actually laid out what they believe a sound basic education is. I only mention it because you will find that when school districts or states get sued, the rulings can come out pretty interesting. So, for instance, there were it's either 5 or 7 students that actually that sued the Detroit public schools. And they argue that they were able to graduate high school in Detroit public schools, but couldn't read.
Oh, wow.
And the case actually wound up in a federal district court, and the students argued that, it's the school district's responsibility to provide this education, especially around reading. The school district actually countersued and said, well, there's any number of things that could prevent a student from reading, including ability and socioeconomics. The school district actually argued that in court. And what the federal district court judge ruled, he actually ruled in favor of the school district, that there is no constitutional right under the 14th Amendment to being able to read.
Wow.
I'll find that case and send it to you. So it's just interesting to see how these things go through. So while Leandro is a North Carolina case, it does have ripple effects in that other states or other entities may use the holding in North Carolina to justify their own lawsuits down the road. So that's what made this case so interesting. Yeah.
I guess one of the challenges that I had, individually in reading over the Leandro case and looking at the term, the sound basic education, and I believe it's the No Child Left Behind law, and it talks about proficiency. So basic education and proficiency, that's on 2 separate levels. So
Right.
How do you suffice for proficiency when we're aiming for basic?
So you are more than correct. And Tanya, in your presentation, you brought up also something interesting in that the state is still struggling with how to provide. So, and let's face it, if you drive through Hope County, North Carolina, there is nothing there but turkey farms.
Yep.
Okay, they can't they can't go to, say, even Chapel Hill, try to recruit teachers to live in, turkey farms. I'm not knocking turkey farmers. They come in handy around Thanksgiving. But there's simply no industry in the area. There's nothing there to pull from. Whereas you look at the skyline of Charlotte, North Carolina, and you see, banks. Every other building is a bank. If you look at the skyline of Raleigh, North Carolina, you see banks, and it's also the seat of government for the entire state. And so it does put those dishes at a disadvantage when Charlotte can look at a teacher and say, Miss Smith, come work for us. And by the way, your supplement for working here is going to be, $15,000 extra on top of your state salary. Whereas, Hope County can't even come close to offering that kind of money for a teacher, or for that matter, a principal. The other issue is, and this has been something that's been talked about for a long time, with definitely in the past 10, 15 years, it is widely believed that, and I don't want to get too much into politics, but that Republicans in the state legislature actually would, if they could, privatize public education altogether.
Yeah.
They don't want to fund it as a rule. And so when you look at things like, so for instance, in Guilford County, we haven't had any money for capital outlays. So that's money that I would use to paint, buy furniture, upgrade systems if I could. We haven't had any capital outlay money for, 6 straight years now? And I have a school that was built and opened in 1964. Our superintendent just went to, Washington just a few minutes ago, and just talking about what some of the buildings look like. And we had a facility studies done here, where they, ranked all the buildings from 0 to 100, with 100 being new, modern, ready to provide a 21st century education. I'm in a school that was rated at 52, and I'm still just third way down the list. So even my 52, there are, schools in much worse shape than I am. So the question is, whose responsibility is it to provide funding for that? According to Leandro, you would think it'd be the state, but the state hasn't really been forthcoming in providing those dollars. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, but it does not give, as Emily pointed out, that the superintendent the right to, regardless of where his heart is, his behind is going to be in the streets for making a budget that is, just completely, contrary to established court doctrine. All right. So nice job, Emily. And who have we? Tiffany?
Yes.
You ready to rock and roll?
I'm going to try my best.
Can you handle that?
Yes.
No. As Yoda would say, there is no try. Do or do not.
Well, I'm going to do my best.
There you go.
That's it. That's it.
Oh, look at you breaking up paradigm. I see you, Slide. I see you. Okay.
So I'm not going to repeat everything that has been said, if that's okay with you.
Okay.
But we did come up with a different response. And I think that's partly because we have a lawyer, or someone who has his Juris Doctor in our group. So, and he, pretty much persuaded us that we felt like the superintendent was within his ability to give more schools a larger piece of the pie. And that was based on, from the court, but I know we said different. And in addition to that, he felt like they could argue that it would meet, that definition of Leandro being a disadvantaged school in their district needed more funds, and the new formula would take that into account. So Is that okay?
Well, I mean, it's fine. I get it. I think you're going to need your mans to defend you. It's not that he wasn't trying to do the right thing in complying with Leandro. I mentioned this name last week when we were discussing the elements of Leandro, and when the case was decided, it rested then at with the initial judge that presided over the case, and his name was Howard Manning. Now, when they sent it back to him to manage, I'll find out for you, but they said this is a case that is probably going to go on for some time, and I think they even said 10 to 15 to 20 years. So they knew when they decided the case that this was going to be something that was going to be ongoing. I never had the privilege of meeting Judge Manning firsthand. I'm using privilege in quotation marks, but I know several principals that did have to go before him, and he would look at individual schools' data, not district. He was going one-on-one with school principals about their data, and I think they initially started with high schools across the state. And looked at dropout rates, student performance, money you spent, why you were spending money here, why you're spending money there. I mean, Judge Manning really got into the weeds, and not often in the nicest. He didn't really care about you or your feelings, but he was getting at focusing on school improvement. On several occasions, he may have authorized additional monies for schools or for school districts, but in that case, he was acting as an agent of the state, not the school district. And Tiffany, I think that therein lies the issue with what the superintendent was trying to do. He may have been in his right to, set up existing funds or use other funds to supplement his idea, but the idea of completely relegating or funds that weren't allocated like they were supposed to be is where he went off the rails. Okay. And that is why his budget would run afoul of state. As a matter of fact, I'd be shocked if someone from DPI didn't ring up his phone and say, "Hey, let's talk about what you're getting ready to do because you may run into some issues here." Okay. Does that make sense? I mean, I get what he was doing or what he wanted to do, but again, he can't usurp what was clearly held by the North Carolina Supreme Court as what the state was supposed to do, and I think that's where the superintendent crossed the line. New judge is David Lee. Tanya, I don't know directly if families received a financial payout for the lawsuit. I'd never heard of that. But again, I was working in a what was considered a high wealth district, and so we wouldn't have been part of that anyway. I believe the school districts received what they called Leandro money for a few years after the ruling to be able to address some inequities. I don't know the amount. I think Robeson County was one of them, so Dr. Stedman may know more about that, so I can definitely ask him. So I believe for a while that there was actually a line item put into the state budget to address some of those Leandro inequities. I think it ran out, or they stopped doing that for some time, but that's how they did that. I don't know if it trickled down to the individual families.
Okay.
All right.
And then we're looking at the paradigm of ethics with regards to justice right here. We say it, that the schools get more funds. We'll say the superintendent is being fair and equitable because they're getting the money that they need to meet their students' where they're at. And this also would make sure that the Leandro guidelines are met, while those that are not getting the same amount would, of course, argue to the superintendent, is it being fair? And then again, you would come up with Leandro not being met, and they'll be asking to do more, of course, with less, which I've heard us talk about earlier.
Well, we're still doing more with less. Tanya, you mentioned in your presentation that it's more expensive to educate economically disadvantaged students. My question to all of you is, why do you think that is?
I would say because, gosh, it might not be. They're coming from where they don't have maybe the access to, the opportunities to be successful. You know what I'm saying? They might not have, the access to the necessary school supplies coming from home, or even having the parent read to them, or kind of having that parent to extend what they are getting in school. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's becoming an issue, because when you have, like with me, I had 39 kids in one class. It is no way that all those kids in that class are getting educated. And it just is what it is. But that's happening in elementary, where they're getting their foundation. They're not getting what they need. And I mean, I might have went in the wrong direction with that, but.
So we're talking about limited low early intervention services. And as a result of that, it continues to have kind of like a domino or snowballing effect as it relates to educating them. And in conjunction with that, when we're talking about looking at additional resources, we're talking about maybe before and after school programs. We're also talking about food and before breakfast, lunch, etc. So the additional money that it takes a school district in reference to just making sure, again, I'm going to go back to the word basic, but have the basic elements in order to be successful and be present and vigilant in school, versus students from other or medium socioeconomic status. Those particular elements are already provided, and systems and structures typically are already in place.
Have any of you heard or seen or read the study of the difference in vocabulary between a student coming from a low SES household and a student coming from a middle to upper class household?
Yeah,
About it.
there's research about the number of words that they're exposed to as young children. It's like a huge.
It's upwards of 30,000 words.
Yeah.
Difference from a student, again, who's growing up in low socioeconomics versus someone coming in from the middle or the upper class. So that's huge. So walking into kindergarten, there's already a gap that exists in just what students know. And so Tanya and I think Tiffany, what I think you're both alluding to, in addition, so not all poor kids have limited vocabularies, but what you're also dealing with is as much of an access gap, an opportunity gap, as it is anything else. What you have to remember, and what you have to work with your teachers on remembering, is this. Learning doesn't take place directly in the classroom. Right. Learning takes place when students connect their experiences to what they get in the classroom.
Right.
And I think sometimes that piece is often overlooked. It's rarely talked about, so that students can make meaning of what they're supposed to be learning. And that's whether it's repeated addition, whether it's the quadratic equation, or whether it's Macbeth in an honors English class. And if you have a group of students without those background knowledge, you can pour into them everything that you can and do it well, and they still won't be able to fully grasp it. And I think that is where that difference in what students learn comes in. Does anybody know what Wake County used to do for years and years and years to try to combat that?
No.
So, and it changed with a school board election. God, it's been about, it's maybe been 6-8 years now. But it used to be Wake County would deliberately not let a school get above 60% free and reduced lunch. So their student assignment was based on making sure that they did not have clusters or large clusters of schools with extremely high. And I think we can all argue that when more than 2/3 of your kids are on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, you're going to have any number of issues. For decades, that is how they assign their students. They wouldn't let a school get above, actually may have been about 40%. They would normally cap it there, and so then they would shift kids around that way. Now they have stopped doing that, and I'd be curious to see if there's been any drastic change. But I always thought that was a great idea.
How was that legal?
Right.
How was what legal?
To limit the number of students you have, or the percentage of students you have that get free and reduced lunch.
You're not reducing or limiting the number of students that can get free reduced lunch. You're limiting the number of students in that school. Right. So I wouldn't say, so if you were going to be student number 41%.
Right, I get that, but how do you make a student go to another school just because they would have been free and reduced lunch at your school? How is that? You know what I'm saying?
I do, and they had a lottery system. I'm not exactly sure how it worked to prevent those numbers down, but what Wake County was able to create then was, you're going to have pockets of kids in all schools that need help, but it was just a lot more evenly distributed. I never heard about overly long bus rides. I think they went with a choice system where you had several schools within a particular zone, so that part isn't necessarily new. Only the focus there was a school may be capped off if it reached that certain threshold. Like I said, they have since gone away from that with the school board election. I want to say maybe back in 2012 was the election where they elected a new school board, and one of the first things they did was they did away with their policy in favor of neighborhood schools. But then I've got a whole issue with what is meant by neighborhood schools.
Right.
But we'll table that conversation because that can get us really into the rabbit hole.
And one of the things too that I noticed, I'm at a high school, Wake Forest High School, we're northeast here in Wake County. And so we have our Wake Forest High School student and student community, but we also do bus kids in from the Central Capitol Boulevard area that are more or less classified as a lower socioeconomic status. I'm not for sure how they actually decide school assignments based on student socioeconomic status, but I know a majority of the students that are bused in are of a low socioeconomic status there. They call it the mini city Capitol Boulevard area.
Okay. So you were in Wake when they did that, Tanya?
Yes and no. I'm just coming back into the system, but back in 2005 through 2006, I was here in the school system when they had actually began to make those changes as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So the other thing that you need to, when you're looking at this case study, that I also want you to think about is at some point you're going to be sitting in that chair, and you're going to be tasked with either creating your school budget, creating your Title I budget. They haven't done them in a while, but you may be responsible for budgeting a school improvement grant. I did one in South Carolina that was $250,000. and that was on top of my Title I budget, which was about $290,000. And so you're going to be faced with, in some cases, if you work in that type of school, you may have anywhere from $500,000 to $750,000 that you may have to budget. Now, if you wind up in an affluent school, you're going to have a different set of issues. You won't have nearly the money, well, you won't have any Title I money, and you'll find that your state budget won't be as much as you think, because you won't receive what they call those weighted student dollars, because you won't have the students with the weight. And so you will find yourself living off of, especially at the high school, boosters and PTA. Now, I will tell you, with those two funding streams, ladies, you must be very, very, very careful, because you can get in just as much trouble if things go sideways with boosters and PTA as you can screwing up your Title I or your state budget as well. All right. The other thing is, you need to, when you're making your budget, you need to be transparent. Now, that's going to be hard, because when you're a principal, you know, the power of the purse string and who gets what amount is the one real thing, power-wise, that you have. But you want to make sure that you include all your stakeholders, and you want to start with your school improvement plan first. Why would you do that? Why not just make the budget and then make the plan around the budget, as opposed to making the plan first and then budgeting?
Because go ahead.
No,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Sorry.
Well, that plan highlights. It should highlight areas that, you know, the school needs to address first, like the most pressing needs.
I mean, a budget should be based on needs, not opinions.
I agree.
And it's a
Well,
collective stakeholders effort as well. If the school is the principal and school-based administration are the only ones sitting at the table establishing the budget, then it leaves out other stakeholder elements that are essential as in reference to what the school's identified needs are.
So you got to remember, you can't argue that it's important and then not put money behind it.
Right.
And sometimes that means you're going to have to make some really hard choices. And then I think the way to do that is just tell folks, okay, look, I know what you want, but it's either this or that, because remember, money is finite. You get what you get. You can't grow more, and you got to make sure you spend it within the guidelines. And so, you know, having a plan first is going to force you to prioritize what's really important to you. And you'll find that sometimes that can get a little sticky, especially if you all are my leadership team. And I want to put more, let's say I want to spend $15,000 on some VR goggles, because I think it's a great way to introduce another set of technology in our classrooms. But Tiffany may pipe up and say, yeah, that's fine, but with that $15,000, you can get me a tutor for my classroom and 2 others 3 days a week. Now, both are equally, I think, important. The question is, I can't afford both. So then what do? Do you split the difference? Do I go with the tutors and hold off on technology? And so those are the types of decisions that you're going to have to make with your stakeholders once you are sitting in the chair and you're trying to figure out, because I mean, you may think, wow, you got a budget of $290,000. It goes a lot quicker than you think.
Well, you also aren't supposed to have any left over, are you? Like, they want you to
And Emily, you will be shocked every year. Every single year, you will be shocked at how much money school districts take back from schools that wasn't spent by the deadline.
Right, so you want to spend it. You don't want to have any left over, right?
Oh, yeah.
So does
So
it go back to a general fund? Is it a general fund that it goes into, like the general pot, or?
It goes back to the districts, and now it hasn't happened to me since I've been in Guilford, but I remember in Charlotte, for 3 straight years, I would get a phone call from the Title I director, and she would say, "Hey, I've got $25,000 for you. Can you spend it by tomorrow? Yep, no problem. I will take care of that forthwith. So I kept a list of things that I may have wanted, but couldn't spend because I ran out of money. And they were able to give me that $25,000 because somebody else or somebody else's didn't spend theirs.
Right.
And so Guilford gets around that by making sure, so they give us deadlines for percentage of our funds that have to be spent. So by November, I need to be down to 60%. By February, I need to be down to 40. And then by the end of March, it needs to be done. So typically, I try to get all my stuff, big stuff, purchased before winter break. So typically by then, I'm down to about 20%. And then I kind of see what the needs are coming into the second half of the school year. And then I spend the rest of it.
Yeah.
But it goes pretty quickly. And yes, you never, ever, ever, ever want to give anything back. Because I'm that dude. I will spend your money for you. Happily.
So Dr. Carver, can you also touch on my principal and bookkeeper talked about it, but they emphasize the importance of really understanding utilization of the school codes and coding. Can you just touch on that a bit from your perspective? I heard their perspective on it. They said as a principal, knowing those codes like the back of your hand is essential.
Well, it is essential. So let me tell you all this. When you are all first appointed and you walk into your shiny new school and you're giddy and you're all ladies, so you're going to meet your dudes or your husbands or your boyfriends for that first lunch as you principal, the very first thing that you do, aside from speaking to everybody, is you find your financial secretary. And you walk up to him or her and you say, can you do me a favor, please? Can you give me a copy of your audit results for the past 3 years? Now, they should know what that is because every school district does an audit of every school year, and they get the results of that in a report. If you get that folder and this particular person's got 10, 15, 16 audit exceptions per year, on that report, whether minor, and you can look at them and see if they're, minor, then I wouldn't worry about it. If they're major things, then yeah, you're going to need to have a conversation with that person. My secretary, and thank God we get along now, but I could tell the look on her face. She was quite offended when I asked her for it. And I said, I was thinking to myself, you'll be okay. But she brought me the folder. She very sassily laid it on my desk and walked out. But when I opened that folder, at that point in time, she had had 0 audit exceptions for the previous 3 years. So what that told me was this is a person that knows what she was doing. And over the intervening years, in the past 6 years, we've only had 1 audit exception. So what I'm saying is I have a very good person that knows how to keep me in line, especially when I want to do something. And then she'll quickly pipe up and say, well, no, you can't do that, and this is why. Your job is to have the ability to listen to that person because in many cases, they will keep you out of trouble. So it is important to know, what those codes are, what you can spend, what you can't spend, what the rules are. Because if there are 2 of you that don't know, then you're going to get one of those audit exceptions, and depending on what it is. So I personally know of a principal in Charlotte who lost his school because he used school funds to buy gift cards. You do not buy gift cards. Now, I don't even know how that got approved. I don't. And so he was at the April principals meeting. He was not at the May one. And that's how, I'm serious, that's how quickly that goes. I remember specifically as a teacher, and I taught high school, and as a matter of fact, my first year I had a senior high school. So for those of you that are in high school, with a senior homeroom, you've got yearbook, class ring, caps and gowns, graduation, this fee, that fee. I mean, I was, as a high school homeroom teacher, for a senior, you can take in upwards of, $500 to $1,000 a day for the first 2 weeks of school. At that time, they randomly pulled the teachers' receipt books. This one teacher turned hers in, and when they opened the receipt book, there were 15 checks and $600 in cash that came out of it because she hadn't turned the money in yet. One of those rules you're talking about, Tanya, is you are not to keep anything more than $25 in your classroom overnight.
Right.
That money gets to the safe, period. And here they are opening up, what was almost $2,000 falling out of a receipt book. She had no intention of losing it. But I also saw her being escorted out of the school. I'm a first-year teacher. Like, you got to be kidding me. So knowing what those rules are, and then you being able to explain what those rules are to your teachers and why it's so important that they follow them. And that's one of the things where you cannot give them any leeway. You've got to be straight on. That's part of what you have to do so they know. And I tell mine every year because my secretary, Ms. Jackson, she does that briefing for me. But before I introduce her, and I tell them, you all know what's coming. Okay, you know what she's getting ready to say. But once again, I'm telling you, these are rules that if you break, I cannot and I will not protect you. And when it comes to finances, it is okay to be that blunt. Because with you, they will be that blunt. A la you bought some gift cards with school funds or you use unapproved vendor. You didn't have a contract. With Title I, you have to have the contract in place before that person can even come perform a service. If not, that person won't get paid. So it is those little details that will mean the difference between you successfully navigating the year financially and not. And so having a good secretary is absolutely vital. I have been fortunate in all my schools where I have had very good, very competent people and people that, have the backbone to come to me and say, no, you cannot do this. And have I pushed back at times? Sure. Well, why not? This is because look, we're principals and you will find we're all type A people. We want what we want when we want it. I get that. But you will come to respect the person that says to you, Ms. Smith, you can't do that, and this is why. Well, can we? No, Ms. Smith, you can't do that, and this is why. Well, can we? No, Ms. Smith, you cannot, and this is why.
Persistent.
Well, what if we got PTA to do it? No, Ms. Smith, you cannot, and this is why. You have to have the professionalism and the gumption to be able to take that, knowing that they're coming from a good place and trying to keep you out of trouble. Okay? Any other questions? All right. Well, you know what, ladies? You all did a bang-up job. It is 8:08. So just one quick check-in. Is everybody caught up? Everybody keeping up with? I think this is going into week 7. Week 7 of the course. So is everybody keeping up and caught up and with your stuff?
Yep.
No.
Okay. Again, reach out. If you can't get Dr. Lamb or Stedman, reach out to me. I'll be glad to help you. Again, we're, believe it or not, on the downhill part of the summer course. So just hang in there, keep plugging away. Start getting ahead of on case study number 3. I think we'll follow the same format. And so I think this works well. We will not go back into the general session. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.